Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to be taking a look at the while loop, how it works and how you can implement it in your programs. So what is the while loop? A while loop is used to iterate over the block of code as long as the condition inside of it is true. And the while loop is almost identical to many other programming languages. So let's go ahead and do an example. So I'm starting with the variable I equal to 0, and now I'm doing while I is less or equal to 6, then print I, and now I is equal to I plus 1. So what happens is we start with I assigned to the value of 0, and now while I is less or equal to 6, these instructions are going to be executed. So we're going to be printing I, and we're going to be incrementing I by 1. So I equals to I plus 1. Let's see what happens. Perfect. So as it should, it printed all of the numbers from 0 to 6, from the starting point all the way up until this condition is false. Now let's see what happens if we, instead of 1, we increment I by 2. Okay, so as you can see, we only print 0, 2, 4 and 6, as we should expect with incrementing I by 2 instead of 1. And there is something really important about while loops that you need to keep in mind. Let's say we didn't increment I at all, we forgot to increment I. Then I is always going to be assigned to the value of 0. So I will be equal to 0 forever. So what's going to happen is this loop, this while loop, just became a forever loop. This loop will never stop unless we stop the program. And this can cause many issues like crashing the program or worse, your entire system, because this loop is going to run so many times in 1 second that the CPU, the processor of your computer, will not be able to handle it. Okay, so now let's bring this back here and set it to 1. Now we can take a look at the example of calculating a sum of numbers. So let's go ahead and declare a new variable called sum and set it equal to 0. Now while I is less than 6, we can go ahead and say sum equals to sum plus I. Okay, and then our regular I equals I plus 1, just to keep the loop going. And at the end of the loop, when we exit the loop, we want to print our sum. Okay, now let's try to do the calculation in our head first. So when we begin, the sum will be equal to 0, so 0 plus 0 is 0. So then I becomes 1, and then the sum becomes 1. Then I becomes 2, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and run this, and the answer is 15. And if you do the calculation in your head, you will see that by doing this algorithm here, the answer is 15. The sum in the end will be 15. Now let's go ahead and use the else statement with the while loop. So let's start by saying I equals to 1, and while I is less than 5, we can print true. Okay, and then we do I equals to I plus 1. Now else, we want to print false. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so as you can see, we get true, 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 and then false. So what happens here is we start from 1. 1 is less than 5, so we are printing true. Then we increment I by 1. So now I is equal to 2, and we print true again. And this happens until I is equal to 5, where 5 is not less than 5. And now it has to go to the else statement and execute the instructions. So print false. So at the very end we print false. So let's see an example of the forever loop. So let's say while true. So this will never be false. The as you can see here, I set the condition here to be always true. So let's say I print infinite loop. Let's run this. As you can see, my program is still running. I'm going to stop it as to not crash, but this will never stop, and this will take too much of your processing power and maybe even crash your system in the end. So be careful not to use one of those unless you want to for some reason, but be careful so as not to accidentally create one of those. Okay, so these will be the exercises that you need to do in order to get more comfortable using the while loop. So let's say print 10 to 20 using the while loop. That's pretty easy. Find the sum of 5 to 10 numbers using the while loop. We did that as well. And now create an infinite loop, an infinite while loop. But make sure you use a different conditions from the examples that I used. So try to think of a condition yourselves that will always stay true no matter what. Practice with those exercises and you will be way more comfortable using the while loop in your programs.